Hey, today we're talking about one of our favorite types of games, single-player experiences. We just wanted a good excuse to talk about some weird games, so here are 13 of the best single-player games that maybe you've never played. We're not going full indie today, but talking about some gems that just kind of slipped under the radar for mainstream audiences. While you were maybe busy playing Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto, we were squeaking by having fun with these ones. Starting off at number 13, we have Alice: Madness Returns. First off, we gotta mention, it's a shame that they're not making another one of these games. The Alice games have a cult following for a reason. They're just really creative, visually stunning games, and Alice: Madness Returns was a really good example of that. Nowadays, some of the platforming and combat might feel a little clunky. But this is just a straightforward, satisfying adventure with platforming, combat, some abilities, a lot of wild, weird visuals, and just, I'd honestly say, an adventure, a vibe that you don't get with games nowadays. These games were unique and beloved for a reason. Even if they were flawed, they just had really great art direction, music, design, and it's a shame that we might not ever see another one. Still, Alice: Madness Returns is out there, it's still playable, so you should go check it out. Next, over at number 12, we're shifting gears a little bit and mentioning Night in the Woods. Now, this one isn't too old, but essentially, this is a point-and-click adventure with a really good art style to it, and I'd say if you like things like Oxenfree or maybe even Life is Strange, Night in the Woods is for you. It's certainly not action-packed or anything like that, but it's kind of like a mystery, coming-of-age adventure set in a small town. This town is a beautiful, well-designed town filled with characters that are all cute critters. But they're also really, really human. I mean, from a dialogue sense. As you walk around, learn about the town, learn about the characters, learn about your character, the player, you get wrapped up in a pretty compelling story. Yes, it's not about anything crazy like zombies coming to take over the world or anything like that, but it's a surprisingly real story told by cartoon cats. I don't want to give too much of it away without spoiling anything, but this is another game where I hate to overuse the word, but it's about the vibes and the story. And when it released, it just did not get enough love, so you should check it out. Next, over at number 11, for our JRPG friends, we got something a little bit different to recommend today. It's Asht Libra Revision. Yes, despite the weird name, this is a really, really challenging and fun 2D RPG, just like the old school days. And there are a lot of games in this kind of subgenre. We've seen a revival of the whole classic JRPG aesthetic more recently, and a lot of those games have been talked about, but we haven't seen this one been highlighted a lot, so we figured we'd mention it. This is a side-scrolling one, but it is absolutely gorgeous. The graphics, the way the battles go down, everything just looks really good. There's a lot going on screen, of course, but it's a battler, so you're gonna have your stats, you're gonna have your numbers. And the systems are pretty good, like the items, the equipment, everything really works out here. The boss battles are pretty over the top. You have a cool talking bird companion named Karen, which is kind of, definitely relevant to your interests if you're a GameRanks viewer, talking bird companion. Anyway, this won a bunch of awards. It got a lot of great reviews. Players are loving it. It only released in 2022, but you never see this one get mentioned anywhere, so consider it. Next, over at number 10, we have Binary Domain. Now, this was published by Sega, and back when this released, on the surface, it seemed like kind of a Japanese Gears of War clone, just like big, hunky, clunky, third-person action shooter. But instead of shooting aliens or monsters, this time you're shooting high-tech advanced robots in a futuristic Tokyo. And, it's a little corny. It's kind of like cheesy B-movie action type stuff, but underneath it actually is a surprisingly good story with good characters, good moments, and just fun shooting. I think a lot of people did not give Binary Domain a fair shake. When it first released, a lot of people were just kind of like, eh. But if you give this game a shot, you'd be surprised. Just a good, fun playthrough of a solid third-person action shooter, which we don't get enough of these days.
Glass for what?
but Binary Domain had some fun encounters, some good destruction, and some really good boss battles and like big crazy moments. If you miss games like this, consider checking it out. Next, over at number 9, if you're looking for a story-based game to play through, consider As Dusk Falls, because this didn't release that long ago, but it seems like it dropped and nobody really cared. But surprisingly, once you get past the look of the game, which is mostly just kind of static images and art, there's a really good story here with some good branching storyline choice decision type stuff. So basically, if you're into games like From Quantic Dream, like Heavy Rain, Detroit Become Human, anything like that, As Dusk Falls kind of continues that trend. Granted, it's a little bit more lo-fi and it's a little less of an over-the-top story, but still, there's a compelling one here. It's kind of something that starts off simply a family road trip where they're stranded, they have to go to a gas station, and suddenly that gas station is robbed, kind of turns into a thing spanning different generations, and it gets pretty complicated.
Hey, fetch!
But it's really cool and very ambitious. Again, it did not really get too much love when it first released, but you should consider it. Next, over at number 8, we have a game called The Pathless. This game dropped around the time of like the launch of the PlayStation 5, and it kind of got lost in the scuffle, but essentially, this is a really fun third-person action open-world exploration game with some pretty simple puzzles, but just some satisfying moments of discovery and kind of figuring things out in this really simple area. Like, not a lot of dialogue, not a lot really going on to it. It's more of, like I said with other games on this list, this is more of like a lo-fi thing, but what it really nails is the environments themselves and the sense of movement. You probably remember this game from next generation game videos, but essentially it's around high-speed movement chained around firing your bow and hitting special nodes with arrows that boost you and make you go faster. And you can do this in midair and kind of jump and dash around. And it is really satisfying to groove and move around these environments because, like I said, a lot of it is kind of like dungeon puzzle solving type stuff. So the actual getting around to the exploration, the actual traversal, if you will, is the most fun aspect of the game. They really nailed it. There's also some big looming enemy encounters that can be satisfying as well. The Pathless definitely isn't perfect, but they made something really cool here. It's a very unique adventure. If you like things like Shadow of the Colossus, you should consider The Pathless. Next, over at number 7, we have Mad Max. This is a game we've talked about quite a bit on the channel now at this point, but we're throwing it in here just in case you didn't see our other videos. Mad Max was released the same day as Metal Gear Solid 5, and for a lot of people, this kind of got tossed to the wayside, especially considering people still don't trust movie tie-in games. The thing with this one, though, is that it wasn't really a tie-in to Fury Road. There were some references here and there, but this was once again just kind of like a fresh Max interpretation, and it's a very, on the surface, formulaic open-world action-adventure game, but once you really dive into it, you got fun car combat that's actually interesting. Got a pretty good upgrade progression, armor, car upgrade loop that really encourages exploration. You got a world they built here that feels lonely and desolate and cool and post-apocalyptic-y. And combat where you just kind of Arkham style punch the shit out of dudes. It was very satisfying, believe it or not. Still underrated, still not talked about enough to this day. Mad Max just lends itself to a video game, and this is like the definitive experience for it. Next, over at number 6, we have Echo, a game that released in 2017. It was like a really creative spin on stealth. This was a third-person sci-fi game that tried to get really, really creative on how moment-to-moment gameplay worked. Essentially, you're stuck in this sci-fi palace where things reboot. So every single thing you do, every action you take to get through a sequence has consequences. This world will create copies of you that then you have to deal with on your next go around. So if you're sneaking around a certain way, the game will essentially create clones and adapt to that. If you try and run around and go crazy, like, they will do the same thing. If you use violence, they will get violent. So it's really more of a puzzler than a third-person action game. It's got you thinking about how to take down certain scenarios.
What is this?
That's you, N.
But why would it build copies of me? It jumped.
The red spikes suggest that you won't survive another encounter like that.
There's some good sneaking, there's some good shooting, and it just was really creative. Some people argue that it totally didn't capitalize on those good ideas, but in this day and age when people are saying they're sick of remakes and sick of remasters and they want new creative ideas, well, this was one right in front of your face, and not enough people played it. Next up at number 5, we have Alpha Protocol. This is kind of like one of the forgotten Obsidian RPGs, but it was really ambitious. When it released in 2010, there were definitely some mixed opinions about it. It definitely didn't get like the greatest reviews or anything, but you gotta respect it for its ideas, man. It was pretty crazy. You were like the secret agent named Michael Thornton, and essentially what Obsidian did was try to apply their type of RPG style to a more typical action-adventure spy thriller game. And, you know, it was met with mixed results, but still, you gotta give them credit for it. There's not really any other games out there like this one. It was all about decision-making. Like other Obsidian games, the dialogue choices you'd make, the actions you'd make at certain points in the game would change up the story and just how things would go the more you played. Like, you were just a badass third-person shooter guy in a pretty standard third-person shooter type game. But you had perks, you had stats, you had different armor with different stats, and the game was also just a little cheesy. It was very much of the time. I mean, the fact that it released in 2010, I actually would argue that it felt more like an early 2000s game, but there was some charm there. This game was dubbed, like the subtitle, the espionage RPG for a reason, and there's really not any others like that, so we gotta give it credit. Next, over at number 4, we have Black Mesa. Now, everybody talks about Half-Life and how incredible those games are, but not enough people talk about the remake of the original game. The Valve-approved remake. Even though Valve themselves didn't do it, a more independent studio did it, they took a long time with it, and by taking their sweet time, they were able to really handle this thing with white gloves and with the love it needed, and they made a really near perfect remake of the original Half-Life, which still is an incredible game to this day, but with a nicer coat of paint and some updates, it really takes things to the next level. This is a years-long endeavor, and it was entirely worth it. This really preserves the original Half-Life for modern audiences, and if you've never experienced it, you should, man. Next, over at number 3, this War of Mine is an intense one. Essentially, you're tasked with managing survivors in the aftermath of war, and you're making the hard decisions about who to feed, who to save, how to manage resources, and it is bleak and depressing. If you like other games requiring hard decisions, like maybe Frostpunk, this War of Mine is like a really compelling look at how devastating war can be. Not just the big explosions and the gunshots and the buildings falling down and all that, but the people who are left in its wake. So if you're looking for something a little bit alternative, but also something that's pretty heavy, check this out. Now, down to number 2, Deadpool. There was a Deadpool game not that long ago, right before the Ryan Reynolds movies came out, and this game perfectly captured what and who Deadpool really is. It is a fun, crazy third-person shooter that puts you in a variety of different scenarios as Wade. You're using swords, you're using guns, and it's really over the top and cartoony and gory in all the right ways. Deadpool obviously is really hard to kill, so there's plenty of satisfying gore, but also tons of great cameos from classic Marvel characters, specifically X-Men characters like Wolverine. But you're getting way more of the comic spin here, not really like the movie type stuff, and as a comic book fan, that's pretty refreshing. What's also refreshing is that Nolan North just does a really good Deadpool here. He kills it. This one just kind of came and went when it released, and it was like nobody cared. I guess nobody cared about Deadpool yet because the movies hadn't been out. I don't know, but check this out.
Is that supposed to connect? Outgoing!
This is just fun.
Oh man, what?
Now down to number 1, we have Call of Juarez Gunslinger. Now this is a really interesting game because before this, the Call of Juarez games were nothing crazy, nothing really to write home about, but somehow, out of all the Call of Juarez Western themed games, Gunslinger really blew things out of the water. This is just an incredibly fun, satisfying, action-packed, almost arcadey style first-person shooter. It's fun, it's got great atmosphere, great visuals, great action, and most importantly, it seems like it actually cares about the Wild West genre. There's some good stuff here, but the most important thing, man, is that this game is just straight up fun. The fun factor is off the charts. If you like shooting cowboy bad guys, this is the game for you, and it still doesn't get enough love to this day.
I knew I needed to find a horse. Though I never did have a great fondness for those four-legged classes.
But those are 13 single-player games that we think you should play. Not enough people did. Of course, there are plenty of other games to talk about. We've talked about some in the past. We'll talk about more soon. So let us know yours down in the comments. If you got a game that you think not enough people talk about, please drop it below. But if you like what we're doing here, man, we're just talking games every day. Clicking the like button helps us out. We'd really appreciate it. And if you're new, consider subscribing because we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.